Okay, so my name is Daniel Williams, and I'm the historian over at the Air Force Network Integration Center, and that's one of the many partner units that we have here on the base. Up until very recently, I was the 375th Air Mobility Wing historian, which is what you might call a base historian or the installation historian.
So how did base first get started?
So, in the lead up to World War I, of course, aviation is new. It's pretty obvious that the United States is going to be getting involved in World War I, and so you see a lot of flying fields start up across the entire country. There was a real push in the local community to establish a flying field here in this area, and so the War Department decided in 1917 to lease 623 acres on what we know today as present Scott Air Force Base. It was shortly thereafter that on 1 September 1917 that the base was formally established. So if you're looking for a birthday, we would call that 1 September 1917 as our date of establishment. Now, Scott was named for Corporal Frank Scott, which was the first enlisted individual to lose their life in an aviation accident in 1912. And so the base kind of gets its start in the early years there as a pilot training facility. And so you've got aircrew and individuals coming from all over the country. They're coming here. They're predominantly learning to fly on the JN-4 Jenny. Two-seat biplane is what you might think. And then they're basically going to, once they get their wings and they're qualified, they're going to go right from here over to the war in Europe. Now, following the war in Europe, and as there is a pattern in military history, right, mobilization, demobilization as conflicts come and go, a lot of those flying fields that were stood up across the country are basically demobilized and stood down. So Scott at that time was leased, and so there was a lot of question about what's going to happen. The War Department, with a lot of community input, decided to buy the base outright. And so at the end of World War I, it was a demobilization base. A lot of folks came here to be mustered out of service and that sort of thing. But the mission was kind of up in the air at that point. And so that's when Scott got its next kind of major mission set, and that is in 1921 when it becomes a lighter-than-air station. Really unusual on an Air Force base, what you might think of as balloons, dirigibles, rigid airships. Think of like the German Zeppelin, that kind of thing. And that's going to be here really up until 1939 before we get to before World War II. So right around 1939, 38, the War Department decides that it's going to move Headquarters Air Force, which is still under the Army, right? There is no independent Air Force yet because it's not 1947. They're going to move that headquarters here to Scott Air Force Base. But leading up to World War II, that mission changes, and so they decide not to do that, and instead the base becomes a communications school, or a communications era kind of begins at that point. This is kind of where what we call our cyber roots, where all those comm roots come from, right here in 1939.